Let me unmute. All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to this week's Apostate Alliance. John and Tent pre-recorded this yesterday. Time zones suck, so this episode will be pre-recorded. You won't be able to ask questions of Tent, though Tent is in the side chat, so feel free to ask questions there. You won't see me live personally until Wednesday. I'm going to push the Smoky Saint thing back until Saturday next weekend. We'll have an open room on Wednesday night like we normally do. And then Thursday, I have a one-on-one scheduled. And I'm also trying to schedule a one-on-one on Friday. So we'll see how that works out. But without further ado, this week's episode of the Apostate Alliance.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 26 of the Apostate Alliance. This is where you can be free to not believe, and you're joined by two non-believers today. Faye may show up, I'm not sure. But boy, you're watching this on Monday afternoon, 1 o'clock Eastern. And right now it is, for the two of us, it is Sunday afternoon, 3 Eastern, recording this. And you don't know how close to a bad day I almost had, because I just played that 30-second countdown and I played the Apostate Alliance opening. Well, I did that once before this, and I had not started the broadcast yet, recording. So I'm so glad I noticed that right after playing those two bumpers, because if we had gotten to the end of the interview and I had gone looking for the video on the channel, my whole world would have crashed down around me, I'm sure. But today we have a little special surprise. We've talked to ex-Christians, we've talked to many ex-Muslims, and a few different varieties of Christians. Jehovah's Witness. I believe we talked to a Mormon at one point, ex-Mormon. But today we are joined by an ex-Buddhist. And I'm very interested in talking to Tenteisai. Welcome, Tenteisai.
Thanks for having me, John.
You're muted. But I don't think I've ever met a Buddhist or an ex-Buddhist in person, but it's a little different than some of the religion, the major religions. But in its own right, Buddhism is a pretty large religion, isn't it?
Yeah, there's about 1 billion or so, I think, the last time I looked. So.
Oh, okay. So before we get started with the interview, I had one issue I wanted to bring up. Usually I have stories, that I find, from the Muslim world or the ex-Muslim world on Twitter. There's one issue that was brought to my attention by Faye. And I'm gonna lay this scenario out. I'm not gonna mention any of the parties' names in this scenario, but there's a point that I want to make about this. There is an ex-Muslim that we have interviewed on this show that was, having some problems, after having left the religion and left their family because of the abuse that they were receiving. And they needed, some mental health counseling, dealing with the issues of, having separated from their religion and their family. And they had reached out to someone who has avenues into that type of thing. And the reason they have avenues into that, helping people that need, mental health counseling, but don't have the money to afford it, and specifically like ex-Muslims that are having a problem, dealing with all the issues surrounding becoming an apostate and issues that a lot of them have with their families. This organization and the person who belongs to this organization, one of the higher ups, they dropped the ball on it. They had said, well, they were going to look into getting some counseling for this individual. And then weeks went by and, it didn't get done. And then, when this person contacted the individual about the counseling, they were kind of, I'm not going to say I wasn't a part of it, so I'm not going to, I guess I won't qualify what they were like, but they essentially seemingly were not following through on doing this for this ex-Muslim because of their association to another individual. In other words, it was like a personal thing. And the reason I bring this up is because I want to make this statement that if you are going to put yourself forward as someone who will help your fellow man, if you're going to put yourself forward as a charitable type of organization, personality shouldn't come into it at all. If someone is in need of help, I remember I'm an atheist, and I was an atheist at the time, 20 years ago or better. Well, actually 25 years ago or better. And I was in a really rough spot in my life. And if it wasn't for the Catholic Church in my neighborhood, I wouldn't have been eating. They had a food bank there, and I would go get food a couple times a month. And, when I got to the door, they didn't ask me, hey, are you this, that, or the other? They didn't even ask me if I was religious, but I was someone in need and they helped me out. So I guess my point is that if you're going to put yourself forward as, a helper of your fellow man, then personalities and opinions shouldn't come into it. If you're going to help people in certain situations, anybody in that certain situation, you should gleefully and with alacrity give that help. And, again, like I said, I'm not going to mention any names here. Those involved, if they hear this, they probably know, that they're the ones involved. But that just kind of bruised my heart a little bit when I heard about this. And do you have any comment on this, Tenteisai?
Well, I agree with you. If you're going to put yourself forward as somebody that's going to help other people, or you're offering help to other people, and you find out that the person you're trying to help is associated with somebody you don't like, or there's some conflict there, the professional thing to do is to put that aside and just do what you offered to do. But people are human, so I guess you got to give them leeway there. But you got to put, if you're going to be the head of an organization that does something like offers mental health help to individuals, regardless, you got to kind of separate yourself from your personal self. You got to have that wall of professionalism and personal stuff. So I agree with you, but that's all I really have to say.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much more to say about it. Just wanted to bring that up. And let's get into the interview now. As I stated, Tenteisai is a ex-Buddhist. And first thing is, like, just how did you find yourself in Buddhism? Were you born into it?
No, I kind of found myself in it because, well, one, I was born into a mixed religion family, not really a mixed sect family, I guess I should say. My dad's like, traditional Irish, German Catholic, and my mom was a Southern Baptist. And so they kind of didn't force religion on any of us. I have two other siblings, and they didn't kind of force religion on any of us. They didn't make us go to church, or my mom didn't make us go to a Baptist church, and my dad didn't make us go to mass or anything. But, except for because of my grandparents, Christmas or Easter, we would go, but we didn't have to do communion or any of those things. But they kind of just left it up to us to figure it out. So what really happened with me was, I was trying to figure it out. My mom would tell me stuff about the Bible. I would learn about Catholic stuff from my cousins because they were all in Catholic schools and stuff like that. And my grandparents would talk to me. My dad's mother and father would talk to me about it. My mom would talk to me about baptism and stuff. And sort of in the mix of trying to figure it out, I kind of got into jiu-jitsu, and a lot of that is a lot of, Eastern philosophy and stuff is tied to Buddhism and that kind of stuff. So it piqued my interest a little bit there. So in just kind of the mess of trying to figure out what really my beliefs were or what was real or true, I kind of found my way into Buddhism, specifically Zen Buddhism, because at that point in my life, I was about 16. It just made more sense to me than Catholicism or Christianity as a whole or Islam or any of the other ones. The other ones just seemed to didn't make much sense to me. If thinking about it logically, for me, even at that young age, it just did not make sense. To me, Jesus seemed like Santa Claus.
Yeah. And then, so is, two-part question, like what is it, that drew you to Buddhism? And then I would ask, so is there like a lot less supernatural claims to Buddhism as opposed to like Christianity or Islam?
Absolutely not. Like the story of like the Buddha himself or Siddhartha Gautama, the story of him it's very similar to Jesus. You have the Buddha is born to a virgin mother. It's an immaculate conception. She goes out into the woods, and the trees that she was around, lowered their limbs to her so she could grab onto them for strength to, help give birth. And, so there's some supernatural things around that. The Buddha's father went to a soothsayer, and he foretold the Buddha's future before he was even born, that he was either going to be the greatest king in the history of India, basically, or he was going to be the most holy of holy men ever. And, so that's kind of some of the supernatural stuff that's there. And then there's things about demons and other stuff. And depending on which sect that you're a part of, because you have like Pure Land Buddhists, and then you have Tibetan Buddhists, and then you have Chinese Zen Buddhists, you have Japanese Zen Buddhists, you have Korean Zen Buddhists, you have Indian Buddhists. So it's just it's as wide and varied as Christianity or Catholicism or Islam or any of the other religions. But so it's not any less supernatural, but it depends on which sect you belong to. Kind of depends on how much supernatural stuff is going on, I guess.
And can you point to any one or two? And hey, you can go ahead and stay unmuted, unless there's going to be a lot of noise in the background. I mean, I hear the bird. And
That's the reason I'm muting is it's not a bird. It's my dogs playing with their squeaker toy in the other room. And they even think someone is out front of my house. They will go ape shit. And so I mean, just as a precaution, when I'm not talking, I just want to mute just so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, no problem. I wish you had left the illusion there that it was a bird. I had this vision in my head of having some exotic bird there. But could you point to anything specific about Buddhism that drew you to it?
Well, specifically for me, Zen is tied into jiu-jitsu quite a bit because of samurai culture, because I was studying Japanese jiu-jitsu at the time, and Zen Buddhism is really a big part of samurai culture at a certain point in the history, and it kind of influences the martial art part of it too. And I had some teachers that taught meditation in a secular fashion. They didn't really teach it as a part of Buddhism. They just said, you can do the meditation. You don't have to be tied down by any of this religious stuff, because they were Christians and they didn't really like it that much, but they kind of did it just because it was part of the martial art. So they kind of taught the meditation in a secular way. And, not to get super personal, but I was having a bit of trouble mentally, and as all teenagers do. And it's sort of, I started doing the meditation just as a secular thing to, sort of help organize my thoughts. And everybody spoke highly of the benefits of meditation and stuff. So I started falling into that. And through that, it kind of piqued my interest a little more, like I said before, and it just kind of snowballed into, well, this really makes a lot of sense to me. But it was the meditation, and for specifically, and I have to keep saying specifically, because Zen is what I know the most about, because I spent 20 years in it. Specifically the attention to being mindful and logical thinking, and not being taken in by things you may see during the meditation, because there are things that you can see or smell or hear during your meditation processes that if you allow yourself to be taken away by it, you can fall into the illusion of it. And they actually, as something else in Zen, they tell you not to do. Don't be taken away by the illusion that you may see, because that's all it is. And those kind of things kind of, for me at the time, and my personality type, I'm a logical personality type, just kind of made sense of, okay, this is really a way for self-help. This is a way for me to, help my own, or take care of my own mental health. And then I found myself just doing it more and more, and it made more and more sense. And before I knew it, I was calling myself a Buddhist, and I was looking for a temple, and I found one, and I was going to a temple to do meditation, and I just found myself in it just sort of enveloped me, and it became part of who I was for a while.
Yeah, I mean, meditation is a powerful tool, exclusive of any kind of religious connotations. I mean, I've meditated before, and it's a very powerful tool if you use it right. But it doesn't have to have any kind of religious thing attached to it. But
no.
Yeah, and then you talking about how they handled that jiu-jitsu class kind of reminds me of when I went to AA, because I told them that I said, well, I don't believe in God, and so like I didn't, I would stand with them and hold hands when they prayed, but I didn't say it out loud. And then my sponsor told me, he says, well, just think of God as good, orderly direction, so he says, you don't have to be religious. And then you're talking about the Zen Buddhism. So you probably would have been successful coaching the Chicago Bulls as well, just like Phil Jackson, huh?
I don't know about that, but yeah, I could have I'd give it a try, but yeah, I doubt it.
Yeah, they called him the Zen master. And so something else. Now, I found it interesting, and I forgot to mention it at the time when you said it. So did Buddhism precede Christianity?
Yeah, by about, depending on which scholars you talk to, anywhere from 500 to 2,500 years.
And so there was a virgin birth.
Again, depending on which school or sect that you're listening to, there's supposedly the Buddha was conceived through an immaculate conception.
Immaculate conception. Yeah, I just find that so interesting, because so many Christians balk at the idea that any of their religious doctrines are borrowed from previous religions.
Right.
So
I mean, Buddhism. I've heard it said from friends of mine that I talk to quite regularly, because I still have quite a few friends that are Buddhist or they're into Hinduism or Brahmanism or whatever you want to label it. But if you take a broad look at Buddhism, it's really like a reorganizing Hindu philosophy and thought and some religious practices. So, like, I think people take like stories because I think and correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, or anybody else that listens to this later in the comments knows, but I'm pretty sure Krishna was like a motherless god too. So I think that kind of there's a little bit of that idea from Hinduism sprinkled itself into Buddhism in the early years after the Buddha died. But one of the interesting things is, as opposed to some other religions, is there's claims. I don't know how true they are, but supposedly the king of Thailand has the ashes and some bone particles left over from the Buddha's cremation, because they were supposedly interned in a specific temple or a pyramid. They actually built a mud pyramid, and they put it at the center and then covered it up. And they dug it up, I think about 10 or 15 years ago. They're maybe even longer. But somehow the king of Thailand weaseled his way into getting his hands on it. But supposedly there's actual remains left from the Buddha.
Wow. Yeah. Too bad they can't say that about Jesus.
I take the mythicist position on Jesus. I don't think Jesus, as in the Bible, Jesus was a real person.
Right. There may have been preachers, named Jesus or whatever. Because as far as I remember, Jesus is kind of a translation or something. Because I don't think the actual name Jesus was used.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure his real his Jewish name was Joseph or something like that.
All right. But so you keep talking about the different sects.
Sex. Yeah.
Yeah. I always try. I don't want to be saying sex.
Not sex. Sex.
Yeah.
SECT.
Yeah. And you say you were of the Zen, variety.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about a little bit about what the difference is between what you followed and what some of the other ones are.
Well, you got like just like with Christians, you have Calvinists and Mormons and those kind of things. So you have the umbrella term of Christian, and then it breaks down after that. You kind of still have the same thing with Zen. You have Zen Buddhism as a whole. And then you have like specifically for Japanese, there's Joshu, there's Renzai, there's Soto, and those are some of the bigger ones. So I'll just name those three. I followed specifically Soto Zen, and the main practice for Soto Zen was simply the meditation, which is again one of the reasons why I think I was drawn to it. So you basically just do the meditation. And then you are asked a koan, which everyone knows what a koan is. They just don't know it. The old, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Everyone's heard that before. That is a koan. It's a question that Zen uses to sort of break your thought process and elicit an answer that wouldn't normally come through thinking. But they use those. The Renzai, the main teaching form for Renzai, is a koan. They give you a bunch of those. And you answer them, and depending on how you answer them and how many of them you can answer depends on your level of understanding of Zen and quote unquote enlightenment. Then you have like Tibetan Buddhists, which the Dalai Lama is the head of the Tibetan Buddhist sect. They concentrate a lot on death and what happens after you die, and a lot of their meditation practices are sort of geared towards that. The broad thing that all Buddhism does is the meditation. You have Tina Turner she's a famous Buddhist.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I can't remember what sect she follows, but they have chants. Namho Renge Kyo is one of the chants. She found her way into Buddhism, I think, after she left her abusive husband. Richard Gere's a Buddhist. Keanu Reeves, as far as I know, is a Buddhist. So those are like some famous people that are Buddhist or used to be Buddhist or something like that. But so you got Tibetan Buddhists, you have Chinese Zen Buddhists, you have Japanese Zen Buddhists. Actually, Zen came from China to Japan, so there's not a whole lot of difference there. The big kind of divides start coming in when you have like Pure Land Buddhists. Pure Land Buddhists are kind of interesting because of all the sects of Buddhism that I've had interaction with and that I've learned about. And interestingly enough, I've learned the most about them because a Pure Land Buddhist temple opened right next door to me. They bought the house that was for sale next door to my home, and they're building a temple. So I started learning more about that. They are probably one of the more Christian, like, and to like relate it to something, I found them to be pretty close to Christianity. They have because Buddha is just a term for an enlightened being. Like there's all kinds of Buddhas, but when you're talking about the historic Buddha, usually people will say the Buddha instead of Buddha. The Buddha is Siddhartha Gautama. He was the Indian prince. But like Pure Land Buddhism has Buddhist saints. They have different versions that they will pray to. Specifically, Pure Land Buddhas pray to Adamita Buddha, which is who has his pure land in the east that you can be reborn into. He's sort of like to liken it to Christianity, which I think most of the people that watch or Islam would be familiar to. It's like, Adamita Buddha is Jesus. His pure land is heaven, and you can be reborn in that heaven through good works and praying to him and working out your bad karma and that kind of stuff. Zen doesn't have a lot of prayers to the Buddha. They don't have a lot of, well, I should probably say Soto Zen. But as far as differences, that's kind of the difference. I should probably say for simplicity that's like Soto Zen or Japanese Zen is like Buddhism light. There's not a whole lot of trappings there to get trapped in to begin with. You're not constantly praying. You're not constantly chanting. You're basically just doing the meditation. So it's probably one of the least religious versions of Buddhism that I personally have encountered.
I mean, I know that some schools of thought consider Buddhists atheists. Right.
Well, that's like a very famous saying for Zen Buddhism is see the Buddha, kill the Buddha. And outsiders don't really understand what that means. Inside Zen, that means don't become attached to the idea of Buddha as a god. He's not a god. He's a teacher. What he taught is the way. He's just pointing the way. He's not the way. He's pointing the way. So Zen Buddha, definitely, I can see why people would consider Buddhist atheists because they're more concentrated on being humanistic towards each other, trying Zen Buddhists specifically. The Buddha really isn't revered as a god. He's revered as a teacher, a very great teacher that people should try to emulate, but he's not somebody that is lording over you or holding the keys to the kingdom from you. In Zen Buddhism, the Buddha is just like I said, he laid the path out for you and then he points the way for you to go. He's not telling you how to go that way. He's just pointing to you that, hey, that way's the way you should go. And that's something else that appealed to me about it. I found a quote from the Buddha that said, don't believe everything you read, don't believe everything you see, don't believe everything you hear, even if I said it. Only believe it if it agrees with your own mind and your own reason. And that really like that was one of the really big things that when I was, finding my way that helped me realize that, Zen Buddhism was probably the best form of it for me to take because it just fit right in with what he said. So.
Yeah, and I can't imagine those words ever coming out of Yahweh's mouth.
You'll find this interesting, John. The Jesus said something like, "I am the way and the light. Nobody comes to the Father but through me." Right?
Yep.
The Buddha said, "You are the way and you are the light."
Oh, wow.
That's something else that that sparked it in me. There's all these great quotes that are supposedly from him that were just totally different from other religious leaders. Now, whether they're actually from him or not, who can say? But they made more sense to me. Nobody can work out your karma for you. Nobody can save you from it but yourself. Yeah,
but in Christianity, nobody can save you but Jesus.
Exactly. So to me, being someone who was independent, mainly because I was the oldest child in my family, there was 3 of us. There wasn't much money. My mother and father were young parents. My mom was 17. My dad was 18 when I was born. They did whatever they had to do to keep diapers on my butt and food in my mouth. But there never was a lot of money. My dad didn't graduate high school. He was dyslexic during the days when they didn't really know what it was. My mom dropped out to take care of me. So there wasn't a lot of money. And me being the oldest, you just got to suck it up and help take care of your siblings. So the whole idea of Zen Buddhism being a religion that was all about, well, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you're your own salvation. That really appealed to me at that time.
Sounds like you had that mindset already before you even found it.
Yeah, I did. And that's, like I said, that's one of the things that appealed to me a lot about it and why it was so easy for me to kind of fall into that form,
Yeah, and just stepping back a little bit, a couple of things you said. Like, first of all, you say Keanu Reeves and who else? It was Richard Gere and all that. I got to call you out for the name dropping on that.
Sorry.
No, I'm just messing with you, man. And the other thing you said when you were talking about the keying on what happens after you die, and I just wanted to comment that, I mean, what a strange phrase that is. And I'm sure you find it strange now. It's like, what happens after you die? Well, for you, nothing.
Right.
You die and that's it. But I always found that phrase, even just the word afterlife is so oxymoronic.
Yeah, it's very strange. I find now, and even when I was younger, that's one of the things that turned me off about Christianity is that they, there was all this stuff about heaven and you're going there and everything is the complete opposite of what reality is. And then even as a kid, you'd start, asking questions about it and they'd give you answers. The answers didn't make any sense. But what I found from studying Buddhism was you ask questions. If they didn't know, they would say, well, I don't know. If I went to a Roshi, which is a Zen master, or someone in a temple, and I asked them, they would just say, well, I don't know. Well, what did the Buddha say about, how life began? He didn't say anything about it because he didn't know. What? Wait, what? The religious leader who says they don't know? What is this crap?
Yeah. So, and from your parents, we said one was Catholic and one was Baptist, right. And you wouldn't get answers like that from a preacher.
No. No, my mom was definitely a Southern fiery Baptist. You'd ask her about religion, and she would start getting worked up and start talking with how she would call it with a passion, and really it just sounded like she was getting pissed off because you were questioning stuff and she couldn't answer it.
Well, I mean, and it sounds like, except for Buddhism, I mean, something I've thought for a long time. All religions, including Christianity, are born out of I don't know. I don't know, so it must be a God. And there was many things that happened throughout history that we would attribute to this God, or whatever God you happen to worship. And then as we became smarter, as we gained more scientific knowledge, we realized, oh no, God's not making the thunder clap. It happens because of this or that,
Right.
So and something that I coined a long time ago in this poem I wrote is that God isn't a being. God is an acronym. It stands for getting over dying, or greatly obfuscating death.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we talked about the different sects and that, and you mentioned that there's many, many different ones. Does it happen in Buddhism like it does in Christianity, with different Buddhists pointing at one another and saying, well, you're not truly a Buddhist because you don't believe this, that, or the other? Does that go on?
I personally didn't experience a lot of that, but it does happen. I mean, in Burma, you have Buddhists. I mean, the main religion in Burma is Buddhism, and the military there has done some ethnic cleansing of Muslims there. I think is the minority there that they were doing that to. So you definitely do have places where Buddhists look at other people, other religions, and say, well, you're not, you're wrong, and they try to do something about it. Inside Buddhism itself, it happens, but I've read some, you read one teacher's books and you read another teacher's books, and they kind of contradict each other. You do run into every once in a while some stuff that you can read or find where somebody says, well, this person's enlightenment isn't as deep as this guy's, and this guy's enlightenment isn't as deep as that guy's. But they don't go so far as to say, well, you're not a real Buddhist. It's more civil than that. It's more of, well, I think you're wrong. Here's why. Let me explain it to you this way. And they all do the same thing. Buddhism has sutras, which would be like gospels. And each school has their own specific sutra that they use. So like, for instance, the Buddhism is split into two main schools of thought at the very, very high level. And there's going to be somebody who's a former Buddhist or a Buddhist that watches this that's going to get pissed off when I say this, but fuck them. There's Mahayana and there's Hinayana. There's big vehicle, Mahayana, and then there's small vehicle, Hinayana. People that follow schools that fall under Hinayana, they think calling their schools Hinayana is discriminatory. I was in Buddhist chat rooms when they were popular in the early aughts and late 90s. And one guy threatened to throw me out of his Buddhist chat room because I used those two terms. And I thought it was so silly. And, basically the way it was separated up to me was Mahayana was what they came up with to teach everybody, the lay person, the scholar, the king, the president, whatever. And Hinayana was meant mainly for the clergy, the Buddha, the monks and the priests and stuff like that. And, one had a very, very big, a very broad view of what Buddhism was. Another one had a very narrow view of what Buddhism was. So I never saw it as derogatory to call Hinayana the lesser vehicle, but they do that. And that's sort of where the finger pointing starts, is up there, but it's never to the extent of where you have like Matt Powell calling people out and saying, well, you don't belong to my church or my dumbass way of thought, so you're not a real Christian. There's not a whole lot of the true Scotsman fallacy that comes out in Buddhism that I personally experienced. Now, if other people have had their experiences of that, leave it in the comments because I would love to read it. But I personally haven't experienced that in the different groups that I moved around in before I focused in on Zen.
Well, and it does sound a little more civil. I mean, I who Smokey is, right? We talk about.
Yeah. Yes, I've been around when he's been in chats. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think if Smokey was to say something to the effect of, you know what, Catholics are still Christians. They're just not as enlightened as I am. I would probably pass out, because him and CJ and a couple other folks are always saying Catholics aren't Christians. They're not real Christians. Right. Here. You talked about the way, and that Buddha didn't say that he was the way. He's showing you the way. He's pointing the way. And now I know like a couple phrases are hitting my head, from something I read, and maybe you can help me out here. Like, when you talk about the way, there's like 4 truths, and there's like 7 or 8 something else that I can't remember the word for.
Yeah. There's to my friends, when I started getting into Buddhism, I used to say it's the first 12-step program, the first 12-step self-help program, because you got the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path. So that makes 12 steps. So I used to say that to people, but basically the 4 noble truths are, very dirty, rough translation, and somebody's going to be upset, but life is suffering. We cause our own suffering. There is a way to end suffering, and the way to end suffering is to detach. And like I said, that's a real quick, very dirty translation of what the 4 noble truths are. But these are something that, the history of Buddhism, the Buddha realized that, life is suffering. Man, what causes our suffering? Well, he in his own personal experience realized that he caused his own suffering because he had all these wants and desires that he could not fulfill 100% of the time, all the time. So then he realized that life's suffering. We cause our own suffering. There is a way to end the suffering, and to end the suffering, you detach. And what he meant is try to strive not to be in a state of constant desire. Don't, try to keep yourself in check. It's just a moral code like all the other religions have. But to me, it seemed like a little bit better because the Buddha wasn't trying to stick himself up above you. He was saying, no, I'm down here in the mud with you, but look, I found a way to be a little less muddy, and it kind of works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Why don't you go ahead and try that? And if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work.
Well, and you said just like the others, but I don't know about that. Some of the other religions claim to have like a moral code, but go ahead.
Well, for lack of a better term, you can I know there's the whole argument about, is the Bible have morality in it and all those things, but it's an attempt to have a moral code, and that's how I saw the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path is, these are things you're supposed to strive to do. Do you make them all the time? No, but it's a way to try and live your life to be a little bit better. But inside of that, there, like everything else, there's all these other little things, like realizing that we're all part of a big cohesive society, and we're all human beings. So what I do to you, I'm doing to myself, and what I do to myself, I'm doing to you. And my actions have repercussions that affect you. And there's all kinds of those things that are part of Buddhism. Just like if you look into Christianity, I'm sure, or Islam, or whatever religion you happen to practice, those things those ideas are in there, and in Christianity, it's the golden rule,
Wouldn't it be weird if by the time this interview was over, you had converted me to Buddhism?
I see. This is the problem I have when I start talking about Buddhism is I tend to be like a cheerleader for it, and I'm really not. I'm just like, I'm conveying my experience with it.
Well, right, and we'll get into why you left here in a little bit, so you'll be able to undo all the damage you've done so far.
Okay.
Yeah. So what was I going to say? There was something else I wanted to touch on that you had just talked about. Oh, well, let me go here first. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Now you said the 4 noble truths. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what the Eightfold Path is?
Oh, sure. Right speech, right action, right thought, right work, right. What's the other? I'm missing 4 more. Crap. Right speech, right thought, right. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to get the last 4 because I really didn't commit those to memory. But basically, it's just, they say right speech. Well, what is that? And I had a friend who was a Christian who was trying to convert me to Christianity, and what is right speech? Who decides what right speech is? It was like, well, would you like me calling you a bunch of cuss words or saying derogatory things about your mom or your sister or you or your wife or your kids? Like, no. I was like, is that not good speech? Is that not something good? He was like, well, no, it's not good. I said, well, that's an example of what not right speech is. That would be not right speech. Right speech would be not gossiping about people, not telling lies, not saying mean things just to be mean, not being, sarcastic. That's what it means by right speech. And that carries on. That's why I say it's kind of a moral system, how to live your life, because it carries into all, right actions, right thoughts, right livelihood, those kind of things.
So, yeah, I'm so glad you clarified that, because I was hoping you weren't talking about like Trumpists or something like that. No. Right speech. I remember what I was going to say. You were talking about the morality and, what it is. And I've often said, with Christianity is, thankfully, with there being 2.2 plus billion Christians on the planet, thankfully, the majority of them, despite their claim, do not take their morality from the Bible. I mean, because if all Christians took their morality from the Bible, the world would be a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week hellscape. And Christians won't admit this, but it's absolutely true. They get their morals from the same place we do, from having evolved over time and developing empathy and having to live in social, so they basically have and the word's escaping me. They have a morality that is based on brain fart, John. Brain fart. Secular. That's the word I was trying to pull up. Secular morality. Because if they were following the teachings in the Bible, as far as how to conduct yourself in society, there'd be a lot of bad shit going on.
And you've talked about it. Knox talked about it. Other atheist channels and some. I've seen a couple, very few, but a couple. I'm not going to call them out, but a couple Christian channels and a lot of atheist channels on YouTube are all, I think Aaron Ra was the first person to start really beating the drum about it, is the rise of Christian nationalism. And you have guys like Cy Tenberg, I think is his name. That dude's
Cy Ten Bruggencate.
Bruggencate, that's what it is. That guy straight up wants a Levitical theocracy to be in charge of the United States. And that's terrifying as hell. And I know just from watching, like, again, and because he's the only name that comes to mind, I apologize, but Matt Powell and those people in, what is it, the NIFB church or whatever?
Yep.
They absolutely want a Levitical theocracy. That's what they want. That's what they want to be as a form of government for the United States. And they think everything would just be hunky-dory and just fine if it was that way. But they don't realize is all of that, what you brought up earlier, all of that finger pointing, you're not a real Christian things. If you have a theocracy that's in charge, your theocracy that you have is whatever the theocracy is that's in charge. And I guarantee for the majority of people out who consider themselves Christian, it's not going to be what they think it's going to be. It's going to be whatever the hell the person who's in charge wants it to be. And it damn sure ain't going to be what you want.
Well, right. And you talk about like the NIFB, that's fringe, Christianity.
Right.
So the ones that want the theocracy, they're going to be looking at most of the Christians and going, well, you're not truly.
Exactly.
You're going to suffer from these laws as well.
Yeah.
You got guys like Matt Powell. Matter of fact, Skylar replayed this video not too long ago that he had talked to Matt Powell maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And Matt Powell, and I said it elsewhere, but in that stream, Skylar straight up asked him, do you think, should gay people be killed? And he straight up essentially said, yeah, the Bible says they should be killed. I'm not the one to do it, but the government should be doing it.
Right. And the NIFB and those kind of fringe cults, I'll call them, They have the same idea. I know, because I've heard, other channels play videos about them and start, putting the warning out that, hey, these people exist. But to bring it back to Buddhism, not to paint, let's stop painting Buddhism in such a good light. There's stories, just like you hear stories of like priests that have in not so much pedophilia, but priests that have, ripped off this church, or they ripped off that fund and ran away, or they did all this and that. I read a story recently of a big temple in Thailand whose main priest got busted smoking crack and meth with his husband and sneaking in sex concubines and using the coffers of the temple to, fuel their sex drug infused life,
Man.
So there's stuff like that happens in Buddhism too, because, we're all people. Being holy don't make you not a person. And that's something that religious people just don't really fathom. Is just because somebody claims they're a religious or holy person doesn't mean they're, that they're not going to do unscrupulous things. It happens in Buddhism. There's a guy who runs a temple in Japan right now I think he's a Soto Zen Buddhist. He owns a $1.5 million sports car because, according to him, he's justified in buying it because in his past life he was a race car driver, and he drives the car to get into touch with his past life as a race car driver. And it's horse shit. He bought the race car because he wanted the race car.
Yeah.
But because, Buddhists believe in past lives and reincarnation and all those things, it's a nice story he can make up. And the people he's fleecing for the money, they're going to just go ahead and keep giving him the money because, they want it to be true too. In Buddhism, they don't have heaven, they just have the fact that, oh, well, you're going to be reborn anyway. So, don't worry about it.
Yeah. So, sounds a lot like the Christian prosperity preachers that have all the jets and everything.
Absolutely. You like Benny Hinn and those guys. You have those kind of people in Buddhism too. They they will tell you, donating money. It's just like, get your tithe into the church, and the more you tithe, the better your reapings will be. God's gonna, give you more salvation. The more money you give me. You have people like that in Buddhism too. We're going to do extra prayers for you. It's good. You're fostering good karma by sending your money into the temple to help us, build the next, basketball hoop or whatever they're building, because the temple is always building.
And that's kind of surprising to me. You're talking about the money, the money involved, and somebody like grifting from the temple or whatever to do what they want in their own life. Because I don't remember where I read this or saw it in the video or whatever, but they're like showing the monks going out every day with their bowl. Mm-hmm. They got to go out and get their food from people on the street or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah. Technically, the Buddha did lay down monastic rules, right, for monks and the like. And one of the rules is monks aren't supposed to touch money. So one of the reasons why they're not supposed to touch money, or they're not supposed to be involved with the money, is because the Buddha, even in his time, he had such a big following, he could see how it would, and this is just my interpretation of it. This is not something that I've read anywhere or anybody has told me. But to me, it seemed like he made that rule because he saw how, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you're in charge of this giant temple and you have these millions of dollars flowing in, who's going to miss a couple $100,000 here or there, So one of the ways I think he tried to head that off was, monks aren't allowed to touch money. And one of the ways to keep them humble, he also said, you should go out and beg your food. You shouldn't beg for money. You should beg for food, or go out and beg somebody to feed you. And then, you convey the teachings and your blessings and all this other stuff on them. You say your little magic words for them, but get them to feed you. And having to beg for everything does have a way of humbling people and keeping them humble. But it's hard to, and that's why Christians are so, you see a church in almost every damn block you go. You can't help but see a Christian church, and no matter which direction you go. That's why they're so good at it, because it's hard to spread the word or the gospel or to teach people. Well, if I just get $10,000, I could teach so many more people. So you start justifying it to yourself. So, well, I can't touch the money, but there's nothing saying I can't hire somebody to touch the money for me. So that's what they do. They all have, people that are followers, or they have people they hire in the churches. And then they also run schools so they can, so the parishioners can bring their kids in and get them and teach them. And it's a religion. And there are definitely sects that are more religious than others. But it's no different. Like I keep coming back to, we're all human beings. We all have the same brains, the same desires, the same drives.
Well, and I wonder what some of the more unscrupulous, monks or leaders of the temples might justify in today's world, because you can actually do all your purchasing without ever touching money.
Right. And trust me, that kind of stuff more than I would say happens more than we know about. We're just finding out about the ones that we do know about. I can tell you something else that happens. There was a Korean school. I'm not going to name it because it's in my city. But there was a Korean temple here in my city. I went to it. It's a predominant one of Korean Zen that's here in the United States. But the monk who came here, he came here and started his school, and there are more than, because Korean monks and Japanese monks, they can get married and have children and have wives and have a family. Tibetan monks don't. Chinese monks don't. So it's just, again, it's just like Christianity. You have those that are celibate and those that aren't. But the Korean monk comes over, and I'm sorry. The Korean ones are not supposed to get married. I'm sorry, I screwed that up. But he comes over, and there's all sorts of, he came over in the 70s or so, starts his first temple, starts getting a following of people. And then, the United States was ripe for Buddhism to start growing at that time. With Alan Watt and all those guys running around and that kind of stuff, and the free love movement just being over and those kind of things.
Right.
There's more than a handful of stories because I started doing research before I started going to this temple. He was banging every female follower he had.
Oh, wow.
Every female follower he had that he fancied, he had a tryst with them, and those that he had trysts with rose up to a certain standing inside the temple or the group that he was running.
Wow.
So, those things do happen. And again, this is just so I can, not paint Buddhism in such a great light, because it is a religion. It does have the same trappings that any other religion does. But, for me, the positives, because I always like to try and find a positive I can take out of something. The positives I got out of my time spent in Buddhism, which was 20 plus years, was I learned more about myself. I learned it helped me cope with a lot of stuff. And when I started stripping away what it really was that was helping me cope and helping me be a better person and all these other things, it was the meditation that was helping me do that. It was my secular practice of just sitting and doing Zen breathing, basically, and just doing that. And the rest of it was just kind of trappings that as I started to get older, I just didn't want to be bothered with, honestly. And the whole reincarnation didn't make sense. So, and then when I started encountering things in Buddhism that didn't make sense, or I started reading it about a monk or or talking to a Roshi, and some of the things he was saying just wasn't making sense. I just kept coming back to that phrase that was attributed to the Buddha, don't believe it. Don't believe everything you see. Don't believe everything you read. Even if I said it, only believe it if it agrees with your own mind and your own reason. And using that as a guide, that was sort of like the key that unlocked my door and let me out of the box that was being a Buddhist. And I started looking at it and reincarnation, yeah, it's a great idea, but there's no proof of it. It doesn't make sense. So, well, we can chuck that away. When you chuck that away, the Buddha really isn't a god, so we can chuck all those statues and the prayers and stuff away and the chants. We can get rid of all that stuff. Do we need prayer beads? Nope, we don't need those no more, so we get rid of that. And all I was left with when I started chucking things out was, I'm a secular meditationist now.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say that some of the stuff you talk about, like, the truths and the Eightfold Path and, some of the tenets of the religion, you sound like they could be very useful as like a self-help program. If you strip away the things you talked about stripping away, there's like a basic, self-help program there where you can use some of the tools to improve your life. But
yeah,
and
that's why I used the joke that it was the first 12-step self-help program. That's why
right.
you always use that joke.
Yeah,
because for me it really was that after I got rid of all the unnecessary stuff I didn't need, that's exactly what it was. It was a way for me to try to be a better person. Don't be better than the guy next to you, just be better than you were yesterday.
Yeah, so that's where I heard that. You said it like 10 minutes ago. So
yeah.
I didn't have a fresh thought. So do you still meditate?
Every day for 45 minutes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm not as stringent on it as I should be. Usually I only do it when I feel off,
Actually, for me, that was the, and for a long time I thought, well, I need to get rid of this too, because it's just a remnant of it. But for me, it was the hardest. I tried to not do it. And like you just said, you only do it when you feel off. When I don't do it, I feel off and I don't like the way that I feel. So, and I've just noticed other things, like my blood pressure is lower. I'm much clearer during the day. And these are things that I contrasted against because I stopped for about a week, and that was one of the worst weeks of my life. I was kind of scatterbrained. I was emotional, and I attribute my personal experience. This is anecdotal because it's my personal experience. I attribute it to the sitting, because once I went back to it, I'm just calmer. I'm able to handle stress a little bit better. I don't feel as stressed, and the day seems to go a little smoother for me because I do it in the morning. I wake up about 45 minutes early and do it every morning.
And so once you left all the supernatural claims behind, all the religiosity, did your method of meditation change in any way?
I pretty much just stick to the basic form that they teach everybody at first, because which is just counting your breath. You just count your breath.
Oh, you actually okay. Yeah, I'm saying counting the breaths. Yeah, I've never counted them, but I just do that simple focus on the breath, and then if your mind starts to stray, you just do everything you can to focus back on the breath.
That's generally why the counting is helpful at the beginning, because you have the count, right? And you're counting 1 to 10. And if your mind starts to wander, you go, oh, where was I? You start back at 1. Eventually you start realizing you can get to 10 and you're not wandering anymore. Your mind is just focused. And that's all it is trying to keep your scattered brained monkey mind, as one of my Roshis used to call it, which is aptly because it is a monkey mind, trying to keep our ape mind corralled and not let our thoughts just drag us all over the place. And when you can do that, there's other, ways you can focus your mind with breathing and all this other stuff. But they're kind of, again, tied into some religious stuff. They're tied into some supernatural stuff. And I left all that behind. And so I found that just counting my breaths was the easiest method, the best method, and it just works.
Yeah, I mean, and like focus on the breath coming in and releasing. I find it helps too. I really focus on my diaphragm, expand.
Like again, one of my teachers told me when I was first starting, you're going to end up breathing like a baby breathes. If you watch a baby, like a newborn baby or a baby laying in the crib, or they're just laying there, they breathe with their diaphragm, their bellies. Their bellies are moving in and out, in and out, in and out, because they're breathing with the lower part of their lungs. They're breathing with their diaphragm. And as we become adults and we walk upright, we eventually start breathing with the upper part of our lungs. And when you're breathing with the lower part of your lungs, you're getting more oxygen and has a calming effect, because when you sleep, that's how you breathe. You breathe with the bottom part of your lungs. You're breathing with your diaphragm. At least this is what they tell you, when you're learning to meditate.
Yeah, no, I mean, that definitely makes sense. And meditation aside, just getting your breathing straight. I recently dedicated myself to better nutrition and exercise, and had been dedicated to it, 10 to 12 years ago, and went from, in 18 months, went from over 325 pounds down to 190. And breathing is like, there's those crazy people out there, breatharians, like
breatharians. Yeah.
But breathing itself, getting your breathing straight can take care of a lot of problems. I mean, because like you said, if you breathe the way you did when you were a baby, you're just getting more oxygen. More oxygen means more oxygenated blood. It just makes everything else just run so much more smoothly in your body.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too wooey about it, but they've done studies on it, and they've studied people that meditate and people that don't, and there's some conflicting stuff out there. But generally, like, I found that for me anyway, my life's a little better if I do the sitting and the breathing and the counting of the breathing, and so it's working for me. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. I mean, so for the last several weeks, I usually go to bed fairly early, unless we got something going on the rage. And I have, for the last, like I said, several weeks, have been getting up between 3 and 5 in the morning, having my coffee, and then going out and walking 3 to 5 miles. And
good for you. Good for you.
Yeah. Not just like walk, poking along, like walking and getting my heart rate up, getting my breathing.
Right. You're following a form for walking.
Yeah. And now I don't know yet how I'll feel if I didn't do that for a day. Oh, I know it because I've done it every day religiously. As a matter of fact, today I didn't even take my normal route. I walked to took my backpack with me, walked to a grocery store, maybe a mile and a half from my house, and bought like 75 pounds of groceries and carried them back with me in my backpack. So I got a little extra workout today, but I just know that I feel so much better after doing it.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine not doing that.
Yeah, it's like, for me, it's part of my daily routine of trying to take care of myself. Like, I go to the gym and I work out, and that's my physical part. I try to eat right. I don't. I'm overweight too. So, and I'm trying to lose weight myself. But I go to the gym and I work out, and that's my physical part. For me, and especially because I'm an introvert, so it helps me out even more. Is, for me, doing the meditation also is like recharging my batteries to go out and deal with other people out in the world. Because, as an introvert, if you don't know, introverts are drained by dealing or interacting with other people. So we need time away. We need time to ourselves to recharge, our social batteries, so we can socialize with people. And for me, it's just like, I do all this. You do all this stuff. They tell you to do all this stuff for your body. Work out, eat right, don't smoke, don't drink, do this, do that. No, and especially in American society, no one ever talks about what to do for your mind, man. Besides, you should read a book. Well, there's a lot more you can do for your mental health besides just read a book. And for me, it's like the meditation became weightlifting for my brain.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I know that like my mother right now, we're dealing with my mother is in the midst of the throes of Alzheimer's disease and forgetting a lot. Me and my siblings, we take care of her. She's still living at home, and my sister stays there quite a bit. But like one thing, I look ahead. Look, that's kind of what got me back on this. I was looking ahead to what's happening to her, but also my stepfather. He's in the home right now, and pretty much has lost his ability to walk from, just kind of being a
right,
couch potato for some years. Even though, I mean, he was a construction guy and worked his ass off his whole life, but then later on in life, he got into that mode of sitting in front of the TV, and so I've decided this is the rest of my life. I'm gonna walk and exercise and eat right. I'm doing the intermittent fasting. I eat one meal a day. It's a big, huge meal, but it's one meal a day, so that I'm fasting for 20 hours a day. Because I'll make my big meal and I'll take 2 to 4 hours to eat it. In stages. But yeah, you people like me, like you said, you're 40. I'm going to be 57 at the end of the year. And then I look ahead to my stepdad, who's 85, and my mom's in her late 70s. And I want to put that shit off as long as I can for myself.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so like another thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add to it is I've always been interested in languages. So I'm going to start studying some new languages, because they say if you keep your mind learning new shit, that'll put off like the dementia and stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know about that, but I try to do that. I'm always looking for new things to learn, or this is my rule. If it interests me enough for me to ask myself twice, if I go, I wonder twice about anything. If I say I wonder, like I wonder how an engine works, if I've said that twice to myself, then I've got enough interest. I need to go learn what happens there, or the internet, or whatever. So my rule of thumb for myself is the way I keep myself learning just different things and finding different things to learn about is I just use that as a guide. If I've got enough interest to say I wonder twice, then I've got enough interest to pursue it. So that's how I do it.
Yeah. I mean, and when you do that, when you learn new things, you're actually creating more synapses in your brain. I mean, that's why.
That's what they say anyway.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think they are right, but I wouldn't know, because I'm not a.
Me neither. I have to ask Sam Harris, I guess.
So yeah, he's an expert on everything. But so if you look back now, is there? I mean, because you've retained the meditation, you've retained seemingly the best parts of Buddhism. But is there anything you look back on and miss from your time as a Buddha?
I do miss I've watched a few of these episodes, and I've watched a few other atheist I shouldn't say other atheist shows, because I don't know if this is specifically an atheist show, but I've watched other shows that have atheism as a theme or whatever, and a lot of people talk about just missing the community aspect of it, and I do miss that a bit. Going to temple and seeing certain people, and then sitting in a group. And just the community aspect of it, I kind of miss that a little bit, but I get that from doing judo and jiu-jitsu, because I run my own martial arts dojo now, because I've been doing it for so long. But I kind of get that from that now. But other than that, I don't miss a whole lot about it, just because I've always been a skeptical mindset person. I never really buy into anything 100%. Unless I can actually either do it myself and prove it, or someone else can prove it to me, without a shadow of a doubt. So I've always got a little hint of skepticism in there. So I never totally swallow the whole pill. But I don't miss a whole lot about it, other than just like if you go to a temple and you do meditation, or you're there for some temples will call it a service to make it more palatable for Americans. If you go there after the service is over, everyone has lunch, everyone sits and talks, and it's a social event, and it happens once a week. And there's parties and because there's holidays in Buddhism, just like anything else. They celebrate the birth of the Buddha. They celebrate his enlightenment date. They celebrate the day he passed away. There's all that kind of stuff going on too. And then they have specific things that are specific to the whatever, culture flavors that form of Buddhism you're in. So there's Japanese holidays that Pure Land Buddhists don't recognize, and there's Pure Land holidays that Japanese Buddhists don't recognize, but there's always something going on at the temple. There's a party, there's a festival, there's a gathering, and it's just a way to, sit in what they call it in Buddhism is Sangha, which is community. And it's just a way to foster that feeling of, we're not crazy because we're all doing this together.
Well, and that's when I've been asked that question, that's essentially the same answer I give, because in the Christian church, they have potluck dinners on Sunday and, gatherings, and they do things where they get all the kids together to do something. And yeah, that was always fun, and being part of the community. It was just the nuttery of the idea of why we were all together. That's
right.
Kind of, and you talked about being a skeptic, and I remember you saying that you don't believe everything you see, you don't believe everything you necessarily hear, even if I say it. So it sounds like your skepticism might be a residual remnant left over from Buddhism as well.
You could say it bolstered it, or it definitely boosted that part of my personality. But if I was honest and I look back on my life as far back as I can remember, I've always been skeptical of stuff. I mean, for instance, I can remember this clearly. I was about 5, maybe 6, and my father dressed up as Santa Claus and came in to be Santa Claus for me and my little sister.
Right.
And my mother told my dad, change your boots, change everything, because if you don't, that kid's going to notice, and then we're going to have a problem. My dad told her she was full of shit, and he came in, and as soon as he walked in, I looked up, I looked down, and he had my dad's work boots on. So I said, "You're my dad." And he just laughed, and he said, "No, I'm not. I'm Santa Claus." And that destroyed the Santa Claus myth for me right there. I knew Santa Claus wasn't real as soon as my dad did that.
That's funny as hell, man. 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And I can remember thinking when hearing people talk about religion, and my grandmother and my mom going at it over religion and that kind of stuff. I can just remember sitting there, even as a little kid, thinking, y'all are nuts. None of this stuff can be real.
Yeah, I remember when I first figured out there was no Santa Claus. I can't even remember how old I was. I might have been like 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. And I'll tell you the kind of prick I was. I gathered all the kids from the neighborhood and told them, and then I got some shit for that from the parents.
Yeah, you were that kid.
Yeah, I was that kid for sure.
Yeah, I was in first grade, I think, when I told my mom. We were walking to school, and my mom was asking me what I wanted Santa Claus to bring me for Christmas. And I remember stopping and turning to look at her and going, "Mom, I'm not a baby anymore. I know there's no Santa Claus, but don't worry. I'm not going to tell my little brother or sister." And I just kept walking. And my mom told me years later, she realized that I was too smart for my own good, because once I told her there was no Santa Claus, that meant she didn't have to do whatever she had to do to get presents. So I just ended up screwing myself.
I remember one time we were talking about the socializing, at church or temple or whatever. And, they had some kind of like overnight thing, for the kids, teenagers and kids, and like, a dinner, and then there were speakers, and, then there was like all these like games and stuff we were doing. And this one game, they took several of us into another room, and they left us there. And then they were bringing us back into the main room one at a time. And, They bring the person into the center of the room, and they blindfold them. And then they would say to the kid, "All right, now take something off that you didn't wear to bed last night." And, people are taking their shoes off and their shirts and, and going quite far until they were stopped, And I didn't hear about it till afterwards, and I saw a few of the people after was brought out. They brought me out. Like I said, however old I was, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. They brought me out, blindfolded me, put me in the center of the room, and they said, "All right, now take something off that you didn't wear to bed last night." And I started reaching for my shoes, and I stood back up, and I thought for a moment, and I had like one of those, like, where your head cocks and you're kind of looking up a little bit and you're thinking.
Yeah, you had an epiphany. Yeah.
Yeah, I might have even scratched my chin. I'm not. And then so after thinking for like 30 seconds or so, I reached up and I took the blindfold off, and that was the joke. People were taking their clothes off, and it was just dead silence in the room. And then one of the parents was like, "You were listening, weren't you?" And I'm like, "No, we couldn't hear anything in that room."
Yeah. That reminds me of the story of how they came up with like the first, I think it was like CIA operatives or something. You know that story?
No.
So they take a bunch of servicemen in, and they tell them to, the room's pitch black, right? They can't see anything, but they know there's a pole in front of them. They have them climb this ladder and stand on this platform, and then there's they have some light. It's not pitch black, but it's pitch black at the bottom, but there's some light shining on this pole that goes across. They tell them to, grab the pole and shimmy out on the middle of the pole and then let go and drop. So, guy goes in, he shimmies across the pole, he lets go and drop. They're like, "Okay, you can go." Tell another guy to shimmy out there in the middle of the pole, let go and drop. "Okay, you can go." Guy comes in, he shimmies out to the middle of the pole, and they're like, "Okay, now let go." And he, "Fuck you." And he goes back across and gets back on the platform. They made that guy in charge of the other guys who fucking let go and dropped. Then another guy comes in, and in the dark, if you kicked your legs around, there was a ladder. So they kicked their legs around. The guys who kicked their legs around and felt the ladder, found the ladder and climbed down the ladder. They made those guys special operatives that worked out in the field. This is how they separated out the people who were smart enough to be adaptive to the situation, those that weren't willing to just blindly follow orders, and those that were willing to, they found all three levels of the people they needed. The guys who would just go out there and get shot, the guys who told guys to go out there and get shot, and the guys they sent in to do the real dirty work.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that, because that's some of my favorite types of books to read, is like those, like special ops, like the one-man army that gets sent in,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
You ever hear of the Jack Reacher novels?
Oh, yeah, I've seen the movies and I've heard of the novels, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the novels, I've read every one of them, a couple of them a few times. The idea, and they were pretty decent movies. I mean, but the idea that Tom Cruise is playing Jack Reacher is the craziest thing. And Jack Reacher is like 6'5", 250, solid muscle. He breaks people in half with his bare hands, and then 5'4" Tom Cruise, playing.
Right.
But, so before we get going here, is there any final thoughts or anything that's important to you, or anything that people need to know about you that you'd like to tell us?
Not really. There's nothing super special about me. The only thing is like, if you know of someone who's having a GoFundMe for cancer research or a cancer drive or anything to do with cancer, if you can donate, please donate. My mother passed away 5 years ago from lung cancer. We had GoFundMes for her, and people chipped in, and we were able to do some nice stuff for her before she passed away, end of life bucket list kind of stuff. If the American Lung Association, if you can, and you see something on there, just chip them $5, $2, $3, $5, something like that. That's the only cause I really champion is cancer research, because so many members of my family have died from cancer. I've lost 5 uncles, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather. My dad had a bout with it. So, cancer research, if you're, into giving money to causes, that's it for me.
Well, and that's great. I'm sorry to hear about your mother, but I can't think of a finer point to end on. I wholeheartedly concur with you. Cancer is something that perhaps if it weren't for religious belief, we may have already found a cure for it. But
I agree. Here.
That's just my little 2 cents. But anyway, thank you so much, Tenteisai, for being here. This was fascinating to me. I learned some stuff about Buddhism and you. And it's nice to, get to talk to somebody who, you came into a stream, I think a couple times, and we talked in live chat, and it's nice to actually talk to you in person on the web, as it were. But like we say, the Apostate Alliance is where you can be free to not believe. And I say goodbye for these two non-believers here. Have a good one, folks.